And after today, the next one will be back on schedule, and it'll be in 2 weeks, and at the Township Cemetery. Right? Okay, so before we get started, I just want to remind everybody to, keep your social distance, unless you're with your, family and friends and you stay in your pod, but it's my duty to remind you to respect everybody's bubbles. So, with that, I'm going to bring Jacqueline. She's Jackie. She signed her name Jacqueline once, and now I always call her Jacqueline. Anyways, she's the real hero of this event. So thank you, Jackie.
Hi, everybody, and thank you for coming out again for our third cemetery walk. Just a couple of things as I want to show you. This just came in yesterday. These are our shirts. Last winter, we asked people on a survey to give us 5 words that represented Beaver Island, and then we created this shirt around it. They're available at the library. It helps pay for our portion of this NEA Big Read grant, and they're $15. So stop by this week and pick one up. Also this week, we have a couple other events going on. Wednesday at 4 p.m. down at the beach there, at the playground beach area, we're going to be having a public discussion about our town. And if you haven't picked up your book to read and attend a discussion, the books are free at the library, so pick that up. And then on Friday, we're having a plein air, I think I pronounced it right, plein air. It's an outdoor painting, basically. It's a fancy word for that. And you need to register through Lois Stipp at the gallery, at the Beaver Island Gallery. We're keeping the numbers to 25 for that, and there'll be another one in a couple weeks after that too. So make sure that if you're interested in doing some outside painting, and I'm not talking houses or buildings, it's like, on a piece of canvas and you get to paint. We're trying to keep the theme to be Our Town, Our Island, and then we would display those in September. So people will get to see your artwork. So anyways, today in this section of the cemetery we have some of our older families that will be presenting today. We're going to start with the Greens, and Maeve Green is the family historian today. So I'll let her talk. Then after that we're going to, we'll stay in the same spot, but Mike Martin's going to talk about the Martin family on the island, who were some of the earliest settlers here. After the Native Americans, of course, and we've got some representatives of the Cull family, the Gatlin family, the Cunahan family, that are all going to be here to talk to. Okay, so I'll turn it over to Maeve.
Hi everybody, I'm Maeve. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Green family history today. The first Greens to settle on Beaver Island were White Dan and Red Dan Green, and they came to Beaver Island from Aaron Moore in 1864. They were both sailors who originally settled at Greens Bay and later moved to their respective farms on Kings Highway in the early 1870s. The area that their farms is located on Kings Highway became known as Greentown, which is still marked today by stone pillars and a gate built by White Dan's grandson, Anthony or Tony Green. White Dan was married to Bridget O'Donnell Green, who came from Aaron Moore at the age of 6 months in 1851, and she spent 5 years in Canada before settling on Beaver Island with her family. White Dan and Bridget are married here along with 4 of their children, Daniel, Jewel, Hubert, Francis, and Rose. White Dan and Bridget had 12 children. One of those children was Anthony Green, who would be my great-grandfather, and that's who's buried right here with his 4 children. So Anthony, or Nick Green, is the son of White Dan and Bridget, and he spent 5 years at a lumber camp in Oregon and then sailed out of the Chicago area with 2 of his brothers before coming back to Beaver Island to take over the 120-acre family farm on Kings Highway. And in addition to farming, he also worked for the WPA, so he helped to build the municipal airport as well as East Side Drive by clearing trees and grading the road. So he and his wife, Mary, are buried here with 4 of their children, and those 4 are Daniel, Jewel, Hubert, Francis, and Rose. They had other children. My grandfather, Russell, is buried right here with his wife, Joy McDonough. Russell was a boat captain for 35 years with the Beaver Island Boat Company, and he also served in the Korean War. And my grandmother, Joy, was McDonough. Her parents were Lloyd and Eva Lafreniere McDonough. And she was a registered nurse who helped deliver many island babies. And she also owned and operated Joy Green Bakery, which supplied baked goods to island stores and restaurants for many years. In addition, other siblings buried here, Burnell Burke, who is buried just on the other side of the lane in the first row, was married to Pat Burke, who grew up on the farm behind the Green family farm. 3 of Anthony and Mary's children have passed away within the last year. One is Rose Green Conahan. She passed away in June. She served as the Peaine Township treasurer for many years, as well as a mail carrier, and she worked at many island bars and restaurants. So she's buried here with her parents. Also, Anthony Green, also known as Tony, he served in occupied Japan at the end of World War II and made his career as an electrician after being taught the basics by Jewel Gillespie when he was in his teens. He passed away last fall and is buried in Ludington. He and his family still own the family farm out on Kings Highway, and they take really great care of it. Also, Mary Margaret passed away this year. She is married to Ed Braden, and they settled in Chicago. She's buried in Glenview, Illinois. And also next to my grandparents, there's a grave marked Clayton Amesbury. He would have been the grandson of White Dan Green, and he passed away at the age of 4, and his family moved off the island soon after, so he's the only Green with the last name Amesbury buried in this area. Also, within this section, just right up here, are John W. Green and his wife Lizzie Roddy. And John W. would have been the son of White Dan Green, and he was a logger during the winter months and a sailor and fisherman during the summer months. And he and his wife are buried here along with 5 of their children, Aaron, Catherine, Stella, Daniel, and Peter. And he was a well-known singer around the island. He sang lumber camp songs and sailing songs. He sang Irish ballads and local songs, locally written songs. And according to Stanley Floyd, he could sing songs for a week and never sing the same song twice. So that's kind of an overview of the Green family in this area.
So our next presenter is Mike Green, and he's going to talk about Martin, I'm sorry, listening to Greens all the time. Yeah. Do you need to sit for this? We can lower this down. Would you rather sit?
Wait a minute, I better. Oh, I don't want to knock it down. Maybe I'll just.
Just go down.
Use my little walker here, but I found out some good news here that I'm going to have surgery in less than a month, and they're going to fix me up. Anyway, I'm Mike, as you all know. Very pleased to be here. Thank you, Jackie. I'll make this short and sweet as I can. I obviously didn't write anything down, but I'll give you a quick little journey and end up back here on the hill of the cemetery. Michael Martin married Grace Brio in Ireland. I don't have all the dates, and some of the names might be wrong. How many kids they had exactly, I'm not sure. But 6 brothers left, came to New York. 2 that stayed in the area, Owen and Daniel. 4 moved, ventured to Mackinac Island. James, Michael, Edward, and John. And there they fished, found good fishing grounds. And eventually come to Beaver Island. But on one of their journeys, and I believe I came in they had struggle with the Mormons and stuck to their nets and goods, etc. They went back to Mackinac Island and replenished their nets, kept fishing grounds around here, but didn't quite come into the harbor again. When the Mormons finally left, they came and settled up on the southeast side of the island. Edward Martin married Grace Martin. Mike Martin married Jane Wilson. John Martin married Mary Wilson. And Mike Martin and Edward Martin drowned in their fishing vessel off the Martin's Bluff. James Martin married Catherine McCarty. She was also from Ireland. They had 2 children when they left Mackinac Island, and they settled a little farther south down from Martin's Bluff. They ended up having 14 children, 7 boys and 7 girls. Small family. They fished and farmed, and a lot of the children, some of them had left, and some of them had stayed. Mike Martin, one of the boys, went to Manistee with Sheriff for years. Charles Martin, one of the younger ones, also went. Dan Martin, James Martin, Shing, my grandfather, Riley Martin, came to town. Gracie Martin, who married John McCann, which is John Runberg's grandparents. And John was also a fisherman. James Martin and Dan Martin and Briney moved to town, and Dan and Shane were partners. Briney they went to Holland, Michigan, and purchased a tug called the Claire A. Elliott. That if you drive by my house up on the east side, the prop that's on the cement there, and the bell was off of that fish tug. They did very well fishing together. Later became known as Martin Brothers from northern Michigan. Dan Martin married Bridget Gillespie. He had no kids. Shing, he married Nellie Johnson. Her mother was Anna Boyle. Shing had 4 kids. Wilbur, Elmer, John, and my dad. Elmer died at the age of 2 while trying to get aboard the fish tug. Hung upside down the family caught on the island. He's buried down here by the Johnsons. All the rest of the Martins are up here. Shing Martin, Wilbur Martin was the oldest. They fished, kept fishing the trout. Fishing was plentiful until the lamprey eel came in. And it took all the fish in the Great Lakes and affected all the fishermen, especially here on the island. Many of the fishermen who had to leave, and some of them kept their experience on the water, took the core carriers, some became mates, wheelsmen, and captains. When the fishing dwindled, Wilbur, they had the tug, and then he had his 3rd tug. Wilbur and Dan went, they went and bought their own ones. But Wilbur took the tug with his family. He Wilbur was married to Sarah Gallagher, Titan. They lived here for quite some time. We had 7 in the family. One we all know is Charlotte, the big C. She married Bob McDonough, and they had 15 children, which everybody knows. So it's kind of keeping up the family tradition a little bit there. The rest of them, Jim Martin and Mary Margaret, moved to Chicago. Catherine moved to Grand Rapids. And Jude lived there and came back here. And Jude, it's almost 2 years ago, consumed his father's body in Grand Rapids. Took him, he wanted to bury him here on the hill with the rest of the Martins, but there was no room. So I had purchased 8 graves down there, and I sold, or giving 2, but he paid for it. So when I went to show Jude the corners where they were, he said, okay. He said, where are you going to be? For him and his dad. He said, where are you going to be buried? I said, the opposite corner of you. So Jude, not to go on about him, he's not buried here yet, but he's had 9 lives. I don't know what it is about him. He's like rhubarb, he keeps coming back. Can't get rid of him. Anyway, back to the Martins. My uncles, Wilbur, has been, like I said, has been buried there. John Martin, my dad's other brother, him and my dad they stuck here on the island. They did whatever they could. There was no fishing, not much. And they did whatever. So then the perch fishing come, and they fished perch for quite some time. Perch were plenty. And they disappeared. I heard it had to do with maybe when they dredged the harbor. I don't know if that's true. During that time, I have to tell you a little story about John, Uncle John. I loved John even though I was only 6 or 7 years old when he died. But, his family was all gone. His daughter was married to Orrin Reynolds, and they worked at General Motors. And John, who had married Ada Burke, several children, they're all gone. But during that time, their oldest daughter, Mary Allen, married this Orrin, and they worked at General Motors, as I said. Ada and Jack were here with John, and Ada, she wanted to leave the island. John and my dad were thicker thieves, and John would not leave the island. But they were bound and determined to get him a job at General Motors. So he went. They took him down, they filled out an application, and they give it to him, sign his name, and turn it in. There come time for him they got hired, people got hired, John didn't get hired. Orrin his son-in-law went to the supervisor and said, how come you didn't hire my father-in-law? He said, come in my office and I'll show you. He showed him the application John had signed, but on the bottom he put, please don't hire me. So he came back to Beaver Island. And then, unfortunately, when the Carl D. Bradley ore carrier freighter went down here off of Squaw Island in November with only 2 survivors. Later the next year, a salvaging company, whatever, I'm not sure, they hired my dad and John to bring supplies out with whatever it was. They were on their way out, they got in a bad sea, and the boat swamped from the back, and John got washed up into the pilot house, and the rope went down to John Brown. My dad surfaced and stripped himself of his clothing and had a life jacket and swam to Indian Point. There was no roads out there then. It was no roads like the Port of St. James. So when he got on the beach, they had cork pipe preservers. He tore them apart and tied them to his feet and walked along the beach to a cabin down by the Beaver Lodge. My dad married my mother, Marion McGinnis, daughter of Joseph and Sarah Burns McGinnis, which is buried right there. We had 9 children. During that course, after John had died, the whitefish came back. My dad purchased nets from Willie the John. Willie John down here again got them from their Willie John's wife, I believe, married him. He started fishing whitefish pond nets again, which was we all of it always fishing ponds with my dad. He fished them until he had a stroke. My dad was very old-fashioned, would not buy an ice machine. Cutting ice. It was hard work. The last time we put ice up out of the harbor was in 1971. Anyway, after my opponent, my dad, he had a stroke and went in a home, him and my mother. But of the 9 children, there's only 3 of us left. Margie, Buddy, and myself. Margie married Bob Armstrong, had 4 children. Bob was also buried down here. My brother Jimmy, who's buried here on the hill, he died young in a fire in the mountain. He had 7 children, 3 which were millwrights, which I my sister Sally, she died from leukemia and, Blue Jerry's and Huntington's. She was married and lived in Hesbury with her family, but she wanted to be buried here, so she's buried. My brother Irwin left here, worked in the car ferries, and then became a millwright, who got me in as a millwright. He had 5 children. He died. He was a business agent. He died very young, at 52. He died from Huntington's. And he has 5 children. But wasn't too long after he died, 2 of his own children died from Huntington's. Mary and Keith in their 30s. They're also buried with their father over here. Then we come to the twins, Ernie and Emmett. Ernie and Emmett fished pond nets with my dad. And then Ernie got drafted, went to Vietnam, got wounded, received a Purple Heart with Bronze Star. And when he got out, he came home and he married Jackie Hallahan. They lived in Chicago. He worked for a car salesman, quite successful. But he always wanted to do was come back to Beaver Island to fish, which he did. And Ernie was the last Martin to fish out of this harbor. Now we have one of the greatest fishing ports in the Great Lakes, and nobody fishing. The whitefish out there dying of old age. And then, of course, Buddy, my brother Buddy, and his business, his wife Colleen, they're carrying on this business, and then me. I have 3 children, Michael, John, and Teresa. Michael's in Washington. John just got back. He works in millwright like I do. Teresa was going to get married this summer, her and Dan, but they postponed. And then, I don't know if most of you know that we had a youngest sister, Mary Jane. She was born with my mother had to give her up when she was 2. Around there. I still remember her in that little blue dress when she left. At the time, they didn't have much they could do for her. So they'd only give her till 12 years old to live. But she just died last February at the age of 64 from pneumonia. And she's been cremated, and she'll be buried in between my mother and dad next Saturday at 11 o'clock. Maybe like 10, you're welcome. I probably missed a lot about the Martins, but I do know the Martin family, very successful fishermen, and they're well in the business. And we're all Irish. Everybody's Irish. It's all Irish. I guess that's all I got to say. I thank you very much. Thank you, Jeff.
Okay, next we're going to have Maureen. Who's going to come talk to us a little bit about the Cull family. They're buried over here, right? Yeah, but we're going to have you talk from right here so people don't have to move, okay?
Hello. Oh yeah. Hello. Maureen Cole. Okay. We've been here on Aunt Sally. Great Grandpa Dennis came in 1858, and he learned of the island through. It's a long story. I won't go into. He worked for a man named Pons in Cicero Point, and there's something happened, and Pons and him and another worker was on their way here for help. I guess because King Strang, even though he was assassinated 2 years before, Stalin still had some influence. But they were picked up and brought back to a point where Pons was arrested and charged of murder. One way, Great Grandpa Dennis was intrigued, so he came here and settled in 1870. He married Mary Lively O'Donnell, and they had 10 kids. One liquor died at a young age, about 4, and one of them in the middle was my grandfather, Mike. He married Mabel Cunningham, June 4th, 1913, and they had 6 kids. Aunt Betty, Uncle Jack, their Uncle Ray, my dad Larry, Aunt Sally, who's not, she's still living, and she's staying at the apartment of the Cull House next to the Print Shop Museum. And Uncle Ron is still living. He's either, I think maybe at his daughter's in Minnesota. And my older cousins have some more, but that's what I know. Thank you.
Okay, and our next presenter is Linda Warren. She hails from Gatliff lines and Cunningham lines, and she's going to come talk to us about both of them that are buried in this area of the cemetery.
Hello. Most people don't know the Gatliff name. There's only, my Aunt Kathleen lives up here. She's Kathleen Wood now. But there were 13 children in that family. My dad was the second oldest. His brother was Cornel, and Cornel was born on Squaw Island, where my grandpa was a lighthouse keeper at that time. And I think there was 3 lighthouse keepers there. But my grandpa Tom Gatliff's father was called Wiley, and he was from a family from Kentucky. And he had moved into Chicago, and he met Anna Macaulay, a Beaver Island woman, and she was down there working as a seamstress for a family. And they were married in Racine County, Wisconsin, moved to Beaver Island, and had 4 children. Tom was the oldest. There was Connie or Cornel, and Ruth and Mary were the sisters. He had, Wiley supposedly left the island to go look for work someplace. He never came back. So they found out he had another family in Kansas. We just found that out about 20 years ago. We thought he died, they thought never heard from him again, but he just took an exit. So Anna Macaulay raised her children by doing seamstress work here on the island. She was a fine seamstress, apparently. She would make the ball gowns for the big dances they would have. The old Jewel Gillespie house, which is down by the playground, it's not there now, but the upstairs was the ballroom. and that's where all the women would wear their fancy gowns. So the women would watch Anna's kids while she did their sewing, so it worked out for her. Tom, after he was a lighthouse keeper for a while, he opened up, he was a mechanic, so I think at that time, in the early 1900s, he must have been fixing wagon wheels and carts and things like that until automobiles, trucks came around here. And then all of his sons, well, his four boys, all of them were mechanics of some sort. So my dad was one, and Cornel was an electrician doing something at a power plant, and the other two were also mechanics. One of the stories that I like about my dad, he and his brother Cornel were in the Civilian Conservation Corps when they were about 17 or 18 years old, and my dad was the camp boxer, so he was like the Saturday night entertainment, between the camps. So he got to eat first so he could be nice and strong for the Saturday night fights. So I couldn't believe that. They said, because I never, he didn't seem to be that type of a man, but I guess you do, it was fun, I guess, for them. So my dad also sailed on the Great Lakes, and he was in the Navy on the troop transport. Then I was born in Detroit. The next two children were born here on Beaver Island, and then he moved the whole family to Detroit. And then we all eventually ended up coming back here, buying property. And some of us stay. I stay here about 8 months out of the year. My sister comes and goes from Charlevoix, and one comes in from Pennsylvania, things like that. So all the Gatlifs are way over there, and a lot of them are back here being buried, even from like Los Angeles and Portland, Oregon, and all around the place. So my dad, as I said, was one of 13. He married Catherine Conahan, who was one of 14. So almost everybody on Beaver Island is related to me somehow or other, one side of the family or the other. My grandpa, Hugh Conahan's father, was also named Hugh, and he had a store down at Sand Bay. There was a community down that way. So he had like a shop or a store down that way. Hugh was a fisherman in fishing season, and he worked at a lumber camp in the winter. And he also fished with his brother-in-law, Maureen's grandpa. They had a C&C, Cullen Conahan, for a while, and then he went back on his own, and one of his sons, Lester, took over fishing for a while up here too. And I don't know, there's just so many different stories, but I think that's enough for now. So thank you.
So we have a lot of families with big numbers of kids, and as you've heard, a lot of them married into other families with big numbers of kids. And so, I mean, I'm looking out here and I'm seeing a lot that are the descendants of Katie and Hugh Conahan over here, that they had 14 kids and then raised another 3 grandchildren, I think it was, something like that. So there's a whole lot of relationships here, of cousins and sisters and brothers, obviously, and the others. Loretta says there's 91st cousins on the Lafreniere Conahan group there. 90 of them. I'll bet she can't name them all. Alvin, you said you had a couple jokes you might want to tell us about some of these folks?
Well, if you'll remember, the first week we were here, we were down in the corner over here, and I told a joke about Bud McDonough, one of his escapades, Halloween escapade. Well, Russ Green was his brother-in-law, and I got this from Russell himself. One of the things they used to do, Russell was a farm lad. They had a farm down on the Kings Highway. So the one thing they would do Halloween night, several of them would get together, the farm lads. They would go to another farm, disassemble the hay wagons. Now, hay wagons were big, huge wagons for hauling a massive load of hay. So they would totally disassemble it, take the wheels off, take the axles off, have large ladders. They would climb up on top of the barn and then spend hours reassembling the hay wagon. So Mr. Russell was pretty happy and cocky when he went home about 4 o'clock that morning, because somebody, was George Strisker's hay wagon or Frank O'Donnell's, I don't know, one of them, was up on top of the barn. So about 7 o'clock, his dad's hollering up at them to get up. They had to take their hay wagon off the top of their barn. So Russell spent about 4 or 5 hours taking their family hay wagon down and reassembling it. So Mr. Russell found out that what goes around comes around.
Does anybody else have any stories? Or Pam, you want to talk about you had the O'Donnells, you said? You want to come and talk about the O'Donnell group? Okay.
Barney O'Donnell was my great-great-grandfather, Barney's Lake. I'm sure that all of you have been around Barney's, maybe even partied out there. He came here in 1858. In 1869, shortly after Ulysses Grant became president, he got a registered deed and it had the signature of President Grant on it. He was always very proud of that, I guess. That's what I heard. My great-grandfather was his son, Daniel. So the O'Donnells have a nickname, and they're called Danny Barneys because of the two men. My grandpa, however, was James O'Donnell, and he was not called a Danny Barney, he was called Jim the Bay. Because when he was a young man, he had a bay horse that he dearly loved. And he just got the nickname, it stayed with him forever. My grandma and my grandpa are buried up here, and my grandfather's brothers are buried here. My grandma was Elsie Schmidt. In those days, it was frowned on for a German person to marry an Irish person. So she didn't have an easy life at first because she was disowned by the Schmidts until later on in her life. She was also a midwife. And cute story, my mother lived up here during World War II, and she had 3 kids in diapers. And one of the kids, when she was expecting, my grandma came across the street. They were living over where Mike Green lives now, and across the street was the house with the fallen roof. Used to be one of the most beautiful houses on the island, right, Loretta? And anyway, my grandma came over and delivered my sister Audrey. And about 2 weeks later, my mother went over to Grandma's and delivered my Uncle Raymond. So, and that was kind of the norm. I mean, Barney was still having children when Danny was having children, his son. Barney had 13 children. I don't know for sure how many Danny Barney had. Willie O'Donnell, his nickname was the Wood Chopper. He is the grandfather of the Gillespie kids, or not kids, the Gillespies. Mary Palmer is one of those grandchildren, Richie, Johnny. And his wife was Bridget Burns. So you can see how it's all relative because Mike's grandma, great-grandma, was it Burns? Yeah. So anyway, all of my ancestors are buried here, and some of the people who are buried here were O'Donnells. And of course, the women are buried with their married names. Tatch and Anthony O'Donnell, Barney's sons, are buried over there. But like I said last week, when Jackie asked me if I had something to say, I said, no, it's just all relative. So now you're seeing that firsthand. Thank you.
So speaking of the Cunahans, now last week we had some of the Cole boys were talking about their mom, who was a child of the Cunahans over here. Frances Lafreniere was a Cunahan. She's buried over on that side of the cemetery. Mabel Cunahan. We've got Linda Weiren's mom, Georgie, is a Cunahan. So they're all, like I said, they married into island families a lot back then. Island families married island families, and it just kept growing and growing and growing. Anyways, anybody else want to talk about their family that's in this part of the cemetery? Nobody's brave enough to come forward? Or tell a joke about somebody? There is an eagle flying over us, if nobody's noticed it. It's been flying, hovering over us, shielding us with its wings. What's that? Oh, yeah. She says it's a good thing it's not a buzzard. No. Okay, well, I want to thank everybody for coming out, reminding you again that our next one is 2 weeks, and it'll be at the Township Cemetery downtown. And then we also have the other events this week, the book talk, or the book discussion on Wednesday at 4 at the Playground Beach, and then there's a painting opportunity on Friday at noon, but you need to register it's free, but you just need to register with Lois by Wednesday, I think it was. Okay? Thank you all for coming. Oh, Mike's got one thing. That's good. All right, thank you, everybody.